License, registration, or just some good excuses, old man? The words dripped with condescension. Officer Greg Lancer stood tall, puffed up with the unearned confidence of someone who wore authority like armor. It was a blistering Friday afternoon in Haynesville, Georgia. The blacktop shimmered like glass in the summer heat, and the chorus of cicadas only added to the tension that hung in the air. The object of Lancer's disdain sat inside a battered 1963 Dodge pickup, faded blue and rattling like a ghost from another era. The truck's paint was chipped, its hood scratched and dented from decades of hard use. But it still ran, and more importantly, it still served. Just like its owner, Otis Langston. 83 years old, black, calm, proud. Dressed in worn slacks, a pressed gray shirt, and an old Army field jacket with the insignia nearly faded away, he looked ahead, his hands resting at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. There was no fear in his posture, only patience, the kind you earn through survival. His eyes, partially hidden by the bill of his corduroy cap, didn't flinch as the officer stepped closer. "You hear us, Pops?" Deputy Emily Watts asked, tapping on the glass with the back of her hand. Her tone was a blend of irritation and mockery, the kind that assumed guilt before questions were asked. Otis rolled down the window slowly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice deep, warm, but reserved. "I hear you." "Then why didn't you answer?" Lancer asked, stepping forward, already pulling a citation pad from his pocket. "No one asked a question yet," Otis replied. That gave them pause. Just a beat, then the tension doubled. "Step out of the vehicle," Lancer ordered. Not a request, a demand. Otis moved with care, not because he was frail, but because he had learned, especially in his later years, that any sudden movement could be misunderstood by people who looked like Lancer and Watts. And misunderstandings like that could get a man like him hurt or worse. He opened the door and stepped out. His boots touched the ground with steady weight. The curve of his spine straightened with effort. Even as the bones in his knees protested, Otis gave them no satisfaction. He stood with dignity. Watts gave the truck a once-over, her lip curling at the old wood and metal construction. "What's this? A rolling scrapyard?" "She's mine," Otis said. "Built her up myself, back when I was younger and the world moved slower." Lancer walked a slow circle around the truck, shaking his head. "Where's the license plate?" "Mounted under the bumper," Otis said. "Military vehicle tag, historic designation." Lancer crouched and frowned at the DOD stamped plate, nearly hidden behind the grime of a long summer's drive. He stood and looked at Watts. "Run the VIN," he said. Watts was already typing into her tablet. She frowned. "Can't find it. Might be expired." "Or fake," Lancer said, loud enough for Otis to hear. Otis's jaw tensed slightly, but he didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the horizon. The road ahead was empty. The town was quiet, save for a few curious onlookers watching from the gas station across the street. To them, he might have looked like any other old black man driving a piece of junk through the South on a hot afternoon. But that judgment said more about them than it ever would about Otis. Because Otis had nothing to prove, and they had everything to learn. The Georgia heat pressed down harder as Otis was guided to sit on the curb. His knees ached as they bent, his spine crackling as he lowered himself. Still, his face remained calm. He moved like a man who'd carried others before, through mud, through jungles, through fire. Watts stood over him, arms crossed, notebook in hand. Lancer opened the truck's glove compartment, digging through its contents without care. A faded photo slipped out and landed on the passenger seat. It showed 8 men in uniform, muddy, bloodied, and beaming. Arms linked, smiles wide. The kind of photo that told stories without words. 4 of the men had red X's marked across their chests. Gone. Next came the laminated card, Otis's veteran ID. Then the manila envelope, neatly marked, "Do not discard." Inside, Department of Defense paperwork, historical vehicle registration, discharge papers, and a Bronze Star citation. None of that seemed to matter. Watts lifted a leather-bound notebook from the center console and flipped it open. "Coordinates?" she asked. "No," Otis said softly. "Names. Brothers I served with." "Why the stars next to some?" "Fallen." Watts flipped again. "And these crossed out ones?" "Gone missing. Presumed dead. Some." I buried myself. She closed it without care, as though the weight it carried meant nothing, tossed it back onto the seat like junk mail. Lancer returned from running the VIN again. Still no match. We'll have to hold him. Might be stolen. Otis didn't flinch. Watts looked down at him. Where were you headed, Mr. Langston? Hardware store. Picked up supplies. Miss Gladys's wheelchair ramp broke. I told her I'd come by. Doing charity work, huh? She asked, eyebrows raised. No, Otis said. Doing what's right. Lancer laughed under his breath. Otis said nothing. His fingers rested gently on his lap. One wore a ring, plain gold, etched with a small cross. The other hand bore calluses that told a story of labor, not leisure. And though the world may have forgotten his name, he carried those names with him in ink, in silence, in scars. And soon, the world would remember. They made him sit on the curb. The officers didn't say why, and they didn't need to. It was a power play, a silent insult. The sun-baked pavement pressed its heat through the thin fabric of Otis's pants, and the grit scratched at his palms as he eased himself down. His knees, stiff from years of field duty and service, protested with every inch. Still, he did not complain. Watts stood with her arms folded, and Lancer leaned against their cruiser sipping from a large paper cup. We've got a potential vehicle violation and a non-compliant elderly male, he said casually into his radio. From across the street, camera phones began to appear in hands. A couple paused mid-walk to watch. Others whispered, pointed, and took photos. A group of teenagers on bikes snickered loudly. Yo, look at this. Old man got pulled, one of them shouted. Another raised his phone and hit record. Otis sat motionless. The camera caught the curve of his shoulders, the steadiness of his breath. His stillness was not weakness, it was control. The officer approached again. Sir, we need to search the truck bed. Do you have any reason to object? Otis met his eyes. Only thing back there is lumber and brackets, tools for a ramp. Lancer flipped open the tailgate and began moving the materials roughly. A bag of screws fell to the ground and scattered across the asphalt. He didn't bother to pick them up. Watts came around from the passenger side and tossed something onto the hood. You see this? She asked. It was a framed certificate, weathered but legible. Bronze Star Medal, awarded to Specialist Otis Langston for heroism under fire, Republic of Vietnam, 1968. She didn't read it aloud, just let it sit there like a piece of trash. Otis shifted slightly on the curb. He thought of Daniels, the boy whose leg he'd tied off under mortar fire. Thought of Williams, whose letters he still carried in that truck. Thought of the moments when medals didn't matter, only the men did. But they didn't know that. They didn't see him. Inside the Exxon station across the street, Darrell Price squinted through the window. He'd seen the truck, he'd seen Otis, and now he was seeing something else. Darrell had served, Navy corpsman, Desert Storm. He knew what veterans looked like. He knew what disrespect sounded like. And he had seen that truck come by every Thursday for years. Otis never asked for attention, never wore his medals, never raised his voice. But Darrell remembered one afternoon 5 years back, when a drunk driver plowed into the side of a parked car with a child in the back seat. It was Otis who rushed over. Otis who cleared glass with bare hands. Otis who wrapped the boy's leg in torn cloth and kept him calm until EMTs arrived. He didn't wait for thanks. He left before the paramedics had even finished. Now, that same man sat like a suspect in the middle of the street. Darrell reached for the phone, not 911, not the police chief. He scrolled down and tapped a number labeled simply, Rutherford. The line clicked. Commander Rutherford. Ma'am, this is Darrell Price over at Exxon. They've got Otis Langston pulled over. They've got him sitting on the sidewalk like some crook. Silence. Otis? Yes, ma'am, that Otis. Her voice shifted. Cold steel. Location. Maple and 6th. I'm on my way. Darrell hung up and looked back through the window. The crowd was larger now. The phones were still out. The officers looked bored. The old man still hadn't moved. But something was coming, and this town was about to remember who Otis Langston really was. At precisely the 60-minute mark, a new sound cut through the stale rhythm of Maple Street. It wasn't the buzz of an engine built for show, nor the growl of an impatient driver. It was the low, deliberate hum of a black government-issued Cadillac Escalade. No decals, no fanfare. Just tinted windows and an authority that whispered louder than sirens. It stopped with quiet finality directly across from Otis's old Dodge. For the first time that hour, both officers stood upright, their posture stiffening with the uncertainty that always follows when rank and power show up unannounced. The driver's door opened. A soldier stepped out in full-dress uniform, crisp and squared. He moved to the back door, opened it, and held still. Out stepped Commander Helen Rutherford. She wore no hat, no medals on her chest, just a tailored navy blue suit, polished shoes, and a presence that snapped the air into discipline. Her gaze moved across the scene, the man on the curb, the gathered crowd, the patrol officers standing idle, and then finally, her eyes found the truck. She walked slowly, not out of hesitation but with purpose. With every step she took, phones were raised, whispers hushed. Someone recognized her, others followed. Watts furrowed her brow. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Rutherford didn't break stride. "Which of you stopped Sergeant Otis Langston?" Lancer blinked. "Wait, Sergeant? I know his name, and I know what he did in '69 when my father was dragged off a battlefield with half a leg. That man," she pointed, her voice rising, "carried him out under fire and kept him alive with a belt and a prayer. That man saved my family before I even existed." She turned to Otis. Her expression softened. "Sergeant Langston, permission to assist you to your feet?" Otis looked her in the eye. "Permission granted." Rutherford knelt slightly, not to lift, but to honor. Otis pushed himself up. The crowd clapped, hesitant at first, then firmer, fuller. She turned to the officers. "You humiliated a soldier who's given more to this nation than you've yet imagined." Watts swallowed. We didn't know. You didn't ask." She pulled out a folder. Inside, the historical vehicle registration papers, his VA clearance, and a list of DOD-endorsed recognitions. All filed, all public. "You stopped him like a criminal, but he walks like a hero. And from this moment on, he'll be..." It started small. A whisper from an older woman standing at the back of the crowd. "He helped my father after the flood, built our ramp, refused money." Then a voice from the left. "He delivered food to my mom every Thursday, never said a word, just left it by the door." Another voice, from a teenager. "He taught me how to change a tire last winter when I was stuck in the snow. Said, better you learn it now before life makes you." Commander Rutherford stepped forward, raising her voice so all could hear. "This man is not a mystery. He's been here all along, in your churches, your stores, your streets. He's the reason some of your parents walked again, the reason some of your children got home safely, and you let him sit on the ground." Tears welled up in some eyes. The shame was sharp and public. Otis remained silent, his gaze focused not on the crowd but on the horizon. He had seen this before in villages across the world, people realizing too late the worth of someone they had ignored. A man in a VFW jacket stepped through the crowd. "Otis saved my life twice, once in Cambodia and once here. When I was drunk and angry and had nowhere else to go, he sat with me, didn't talk, just stayed." One of the teenagers lowered his phone. "He's the one who helped my sister with her walker ramp. I thought she hired someone." "No," the mother said. "He just showed up." Commander Rutherford nodded. "The measure of a life is not in what's taken, but what's given. Sergeant Langston has given more than we deserve." She handed a file to Lancer. "Read this, then ask yourself if your badge means more than your judgment." Otis finally spoke. "People forget what you say. They remember how you make them feel. Make sure you're remembered for the right reason." A boy in the crowd whispered to his mother, "Is he famous?" She knelt beside him. "No, he's more than that. He's real." The story didn't end on the curb. If anything, that was just where the truth began to surface. Within 24 hours, the footage had gone viral. Not just the clip of Commander Rutherford confronting the officers, but Otis's final words, captured by a bystander's phone. "Be sure your badge can carry the weight of your judgment." It struck a nerve. Within hours, people began sharing their own stories of quiet veterans, humble neighbors, the men and women who'd sacrificed everything and were thanked with nothing more than silence. By Sunday morning, cable news anchors debated the incident. Hashtags like Otis Langston, Quiet Heroes, and Respect First trended across all platforms. Students at a local high school painted murals of Otis's truck. By Tuesday, the town's post office was flooded with letters, thank yous, apologies, and handmade drawings from children. Donations poured into the local veteran relief fund that Otis had never even advertised. Over 120 by Tuesday. And when reporters showed up to hand him checks and cameras, he said only, "Put it where it belongs, into dignity." He directed the money toward repairing accessibility infrastructure throughout the county, ramps, porches, and plumbing. Volunteers showed up, young, old, even a few off-duty officers, Lancer included. No uniform, just a hammer and a quiet apology. The mayor of Haynesville called an emergency town hall and stood before the courthouse with a statement that was televised statewide. "We overlooked a man who never overlooked anyone else. And for that, this town apologizes not just to Sergeant Langston, but to every elder we've ever ignored. Let this moment make us better, not bitter." Watts resigned. Quietly. No press release. No formal acknowledgement. Lancer, however, stayed. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps responsibility. Or maybe because deep down, he knew he could no longer live with ignorance or hide behind his badge. Commander Rutherford created a new veteran awareness training program, and Lancer was the first mandatory enrollee. It began with a single instruction: listen before you speak. She placed Otis at the heart of it. "If you can learn from him," she told a room full of rookies, "you can learn to see anyone." Otis never boasted. He never recounted his stories like trophies. He just showed up every week, sat at the front of the classroom, and said little. But what he did say left a mark. You don't need to wear a medal to have earned one, but you do need to know what it cost. He became more than a mentor. He became the example that every new recruit had to measure themselves against. 6 weeks later, at the intersection of Maple and 6th, a new structure rose beside the sidewalk, a simple bench of stone and steel, inscribed with a plaque. "In honor of Sean and Otis Langston, medic, builder, neighbor, seen at last." The town gathered, not just Haynesville's residents, but people from neighboring counties, fellow veterans, and even those who had driven cross-state to shake his hand. The ceremony was modest, just the way Otis would have preferred. Folding chairs, lemonade pitchers, kids in Sunday shoes. The bench faced east, where the sun rose and lit the road he had driven so many mornings. And parked nearby, cleaned and polished, but still proudly dented, was his truck. The very same one. Children from the elementary school had written letters. Some drew pictures of Otis in a cape. Others asked if he would teach them how to build ramps. Otis read every single one, underlining names and writing short replies in thick black ink. Lancer, now serving in a community liaison role, stood in front of the crowd and cleared his throat. His uniform was crisp, but his voice trembled with humility. "I didn't know who I stopped that day," he said. "But what I've learned since is that we must treat everyone like they might be Otis Langston, because everyone carries a story we haven't heard yet." He turned and saluted. Otis didn't salute back. He nodded slow, steady, because some acknowledgments are earned, not returned. Otis didn't give a speech, but he did stand. And when the townspeople clapped, it wasn't just for a man. It was for a reminder that dignity can be quiet, but it should never be invisible. He still drove that same rattling truck. On Sundays, he visited the nursing home. On Wednesdays, the school. On Fridays, the VFW. Each time, someone new recognized him. And now, when that truck rolled down Main Street, officers didn't reach for their sirens. They stepped aside. Not out of fear, out of respect. The kind that can't be demanded, only earned, and never forgotten.